The shuttle that ferried Caleb Rains from the orbital docking ring to the surface of the planet did not possess windows. It was a sleek, silver needle of a vessel, designed to transport diplomatic cargo with maximum efficiency and minimum scenic distraction. Caleb sat in the pressurized cabin, adjusting the cuffs of his formal tunic, trying to ignore the way his stomach lurched every time the thrusters corrected their descent vector. He was 32 years old, a linguistic prodigy with a doctorate in xenolinguistics from Stanford and a reputation for handling first-contact scenarios that would make lesser translators vomit from anxiety. Yet, as the gravitational dampers whined and the hull shuddered, Caleb felt less like an expert and more like a man walking into a lion's den wearing a suit made of raw meat. He was not here for a simple trade dispute. He had been hired by the Terran Coalition to serve as the primary neutral interpreter for the Astraeum Peace Summit. The Astraeum Empire, a dominion of star systems so vast and ancient that humanity was a mere footnote in their history books, was on the verge of fracturing. Several frontier systems were threatening secession, and the imperial throne had granted them an audience. Caleb's job was to ensure that the nuanced metaphors of the frontier warlords did not accidentally declare war on the imperial court due to a grammatical error. The shuttle docked with a heavy metallic thud. The airlock hissed, cycling the atmosphere, and the ramp descended. Caleb stepped out, and his breath caught in his throat. He had read the briefings. He had studied the holographic schematics. But nothing could prepare a human mind for the physical reality of the Astraeum Palace. It was not built. It was grown. The structure rose from the edge of a jagged cliff like an eruption of living crystal, a mountain of translucent spires that pierced the violet sky. Platforms hovered around the main spire like orbiting moons, connected by bridges of hard light that shimmered with the pulse of heavy data streams. The air smelled of ozone and crushed mint, a byproduct of the atmospheric shielding that kept the palace habitable at this altitude. A welcoming committee of two stood at the base of the ramp. They were royal guards, towering figures encased in armor that looked like poured obsidian, faceless and terrifyingly still. Between them stood a shorter figure, a palace functionary with pale blue skin and eyes that looked like pools of liquid mercury. The functionary bowed, a precise 45-degree angle. "Master Rains," the functionary said, their voice melodic but devoid of warmth. "I am Valerius. Welcome to the heart of the Empire. We have a strict schedule. Please follow." Caleb nodded, falling into step beside the alien. He tapped the small device behind his ear, ensuring his universal translator was synced to the local dialect, as they walked through the colossal archway that served as the palace entrance. Valerius leaned in closer, his mercury eyes narrowing. "There are 3 rules you must observe while within these walls," Valerius said, his tone dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. Caleb adjusted his pace to match the functionary. "I read the protocol manual. Valerius, no weapons. Speak only when addressed. And the manual is for tourists and trade delegates." Valerius interrupted, his voice sharp. "You are going to the throne hall. The rules there are written in blood, not ink. Listen to me. Rule 1, never touch royalty. To lay a hand on the blood of the goddess is to invite immediate execution. Rule 2, never speak the queen's birth name. She is her imperial radiance, the matriarch of stars, or simply your majesty. Her birth name is a sacred vibration that your human vocal cords would only defile. And the third?" Caleb asked, feeling a cold bead of sweat slide down his spine. Valerius stopped abruptly, turning to face Caleb. The alien's face was grave. "Rule 3, never look directly into the eyes of the Princess Nixara without explicit permission." "Why?" Caleb asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Because, Valerius said, resuming his walk, the princess is not merely an heir. She is a weapon. Her gaze is considered a challenge. If you look at her, she may look back, and you do not want to be seen by the Voidwalker. They continued in silence, passing through corridors that seemed to breathe. The walls pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light, and Caleb realized with a start that the crystal structure was conducting energy, perhaps even information, through its very latticework. They reached a set of doors that were 50 feet high, etched with intricate carvings of celestial warfare. The doors groaned open, revealing the throne hall. If the exterior was a mountain, the interior was a cavern designed by gods who wanted to make mortals feel insignificant. The ceiling was so high it was lost in shadow, though hovering drones drifted like fireflies in the upper gloom, their camera lenses recording every micro-expression below. The floor was a vast expanse of polished obsidian, reflective enough that Caleb could see his own nervous reflection walking upside down beneath him. Hundreds of alien nobles filled the tiered galleries on either side of the central walkway. They were a kaleidoscope of species and fashion, beings with iridescent scales draped in silks that defied gravity, humanoids with cybernetic halos, and creatures that looked like statues carved from living wood. The air hummed with the sound of 1,000 whispered conversations, a sound that stopped instantly as Caleb and Valerius entered. It felt like walking into a starship hangar turned cathedral, filled with a court that smiled like it was sharpening knives. Caleb kept his eyes forward, focusing on the dais at the far end of the hall. He could feel the weight of their attention. He was the anomaly here, the soft, short-lived human hired to speak words of peace in a room built for war. At the end of the hall, upon a throne carved from a single diamond the size of a shuttlecraft, sat Queen Elira. She was terrifying. She was humanoid, tall and slender, with skin the color of moonlight and hair that flowed like liquid silver. She wore a gown that seemed to be woven from fiber optics, shifting color with her mood. But it was her stillness that frightened Caleb. She sat with absolute predatory calm, her hands resting lightly on the arms of her throne. She radiated political power so intense it felt like a physical pressure in the room. Caleb stopped at the designated marker, 10 paces from the dais. He bowed low, holding the position until he heard her voice. "Rise. Caleb, Reigns of Earth," Queen Elira said. Her voice was not loud, yet it carried to the furthest corners of the hall without amplification. Caleb straightened. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I am honored to serve the court." The queen tilted her head slightly, studying him. She treated him politely, but it was the politeness of a scientist examining a microbe. "You come highly recommended," the queen said. "They say you can translate intent, not just words, that you can find the bridge between enemies." "I try." "Your Majesty," Caleb replied, "language is the architecture of thought. If we understand the structure, we can find the door." A ripple of unease moved through the room, a collective intake of breath from the gathered nobles. Caleb sensed the shift in atmosphere before he saw the cause. The heavy doors to the left of the throne slid open. Princess Nyxara had arrived. Caleb remembered Valerius's warning, but human instinct was a difficult thing to override. He glanced toward the movement. She was breathtaking, and she looked absolutely lethal. Nyxara was taller than her mother, with the same moonlight skin, but where the queen was ice, the princess was fire. Her hair was a dark, violent violet, cropped short in a military style. She wore a ceremonial dress that was cut high to reveal legs encased in combat mesh, and her torso was armored in plates of white ceramic. But what caught Caleb's eye was the jewelry. She wore thick humming collars of gold around her neck, wrists, and ankles. To the uninitiated, they looked like royal ornamentation. To Caleb, who had studied imperial tech, they were unmistakable. They were dampeners, restraint technology. She was radiating controlled violence, walking with the prowling grace of a tiger in a cage. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, obeying the protocol of submission, but her jaw was set in a line of defiance. The queen did not look at her daughter. "Take your place, Nixara," the queen said coldly. The princess moved to a smaller throne to the queen's right, sitting with a rigid tension that suggested she might spring from the chair at any moment. "We shall begin," the queen announced. "The delegation from the frontier systems waits. Interpreter Rains, prepare the greeting." Caleb took a deep breath. This was the moment. He needed to recite the ceremonial greeting of the void, a complex phrase that acknowledged the queen's sovereignty while welcoming the guests. It required precise tonal inflection. He tapped his throat mic. He opened his mouth, and his neural translator implant glitched. It was a 1 in a billion error, a flare of static in his auditory cortex that scrambled the syntax output. Instead of saying, "We stand in the shadow of your wisdom and welcome the lost kin," Caleb's mouth formed the words for a dialect used only in the darkest dockside brothels of the lower moons. "Your radiance tastes like spiced melon in the bed sheets of a traitor." Caleb boomed, the alien syllables rolling off his tongue with perfect, horrifying clarity. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Caleb froze, his brain catching up to what his mouth had just done almost a full second later. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. A few nobles in the upper galleries snickered, a sharp, cruel sound. Others looked visibly offended, hands clutching their pearls or chest plates. Valerius, standing a few feet behind Caleb, let out a small, strangled whimper. Caleb scrambled to correct himself. "Your Majesty, apologies. A malfunction." He looked up, desperate to gauge the damage. The queen's face was stone, her eyes narrowing slightly. But then, movement caught his periphery. Princess Nixara had lifted her head. She was looking at him. He had broken the rule. He was looking directly into her eyes. They were violet, swirling with a galaxy of flecks, and for a heartbeat. She looked amused. She tilted her head, a smirk touching the corner of her lips, as if enjoying the sheer chaos of his failure. Then, her eyes locked onto his face. The amusement vanished. It was replaced by something else, shock. Absolute shattering recognition. Her pupils dilated, swallowing the violet irises. Her breath hitched, a sound loud enough to be heard in the silent hall. The title moment happened in a specific, unmistakable detail. Nixara stood up. She didn't rise gracefully. She shoved herself off the throne with enough force to crack the stone armrest. "Nixara?" the queen said, her voice sharp with warning. The princess ignored her. She stepped off the dais. Then, she started to run. It was not a diplomatic walk. It was a sprint. She moved with terrifying speed, her dress and armor segments flowing behind her like a war banner. Her boots slammed against the polished obsidian floor, echoing like gunshots. Caleb stood paralyzed. His brain screamed at him to run, to drop to his knees, to do anything, but his body refused to obey. He was a deer in the headlights of a crashing starship. She was coming straight for him. The entire palace froze when the alien queen's daughter ran and hugged me, Caleb thought, the sentence forming in his mind with detached clarity. Nixara crashed into him. She didn't tackle him, she embraced him. She wrapped her arms around his torso, burying her face in the crook of his neck. and squeezed him with a strength that cracked his ribs. The momentum nearly knocked him over, but she held him up, pressing her forehead against his chest like she had been starving for this specific contact for 1,000 years. The court went silent so hard it felt like gravity increased. The hovering drones paused mid-air, their motors whirring in confused loops. A noble in the front row dropped a jeweled cup. It didn't even hit the floor before a servant caught it, terrified to make a noise that might shatter the impossible reality unfolding before them. Caleb stood there, his arms hovering awkwardly at his sides, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could feel Nixara trembling against him. She smelled of ozone, crushed flowers, and something uniquely hers, the sharp, electric scent of a storm about to break. Queen Elira's face did not change. Her expression remained a mask of icy indifference, but her fingers tightened on the diamond armrest of her throne. The stone groaned under the pressure, a hairline fracture appearing beneath her thumb, an almost invisible sign of shock. Nixara pulled back slightly, just enough to look at Caleb's face, her hands gripping his biceps so hard it bruised. Her eyes searched his, frantic and wet with unshed tears. She leaned in and whispered something only he could hear. "Little bear." She breathed. It was perfect English, no accent, no translator interference. And it was a name that no one in this galaxy, no one in this universe should know. It was the nickname his mother had used when he was 5 years old. Caleb's blood turned cold. The room spun. Nixara. The Queen's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Step away from the interpreter." The spell broke. Nixara flinched, her eyes darting back to her mother, then to the court, then back to Caleb. The realization of what she had just done seemed to crash down on her. She released him, stepping back, her chest heaving. The vulnerability vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of snarling defiance. From the gallery to the left, a woman watched. She was striking, with crimson skin and horns that curled back like a crown. She wore robes of deep midnight blue. This was Lady Vespera Kane, the grand strategist of the court. She did not look shocked. She did not look scandalized. She watched the scene with a faint, poison-tipped smile, her eyes flicking between Caleb and the princess with cold calculation. She looked like a predator that had just discovered a new, interesting scent. "Guards," the Queen said softly. 2 obsidian-armored giants materialized on either side of Caleb. "Escort the interpreter to the Sapphire guest wing." The Queen commanded, "He is clearly unwell. We will suspend the session." They gripped Caleb's arms. It was a polite grip, but it was iron. As they turned him away, Caleb glanced back one last time. Nixara was standing alone in the center of the vast floor, her hands clenched into fists, staring at him as if she were trying to memorize his face before he disappeared. Caleb realized with a sinking dread that he was not being sent to a guest room. He was not a diplomat anymore. He was evidence. The Sapphire guest wing was beautiful, in the way a gilded cage is beautiful. The walls were translucent blue crystal that hummed with a low, soothing frequency. The furniture was sculpted from white anti-gravity foam. There were no handles on the doors. Caleb paced the room, his mind racing. Little bear. How? How could an alien princess, the daughter of a xenophobic empire located 3,000 light-years from Earth, know a nickname from his childhood? He checked the door again. Sealed. He sat on the edge of the bed, putting his head in his hands. He had been on the surface for less than 2 hours, and he had already sexually harassed the court via translation error and been physically assaulted by royalty. His career was over. His life was likely over. The wall shimmered. Caleb jumped up. A section of the crystal wall dissolved into mist, and Princess Nixara stepped through. She was alone. The biotech jewelry on her wrists hummed aggressively, struggling to contain her heightened emotional state. She looked breathless, as if she had run all the way here from the throne room. The wall solidified behind her. "You," she said. Her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with anger. "Who are you?" Caleb raised his hands, palms open. "Your Highness, I am Caleb Rains. I am a translator. I don't know what just happened out there, but—" "Don't lie to me!" Nixara shouted, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. She grabbed the front of his tunic and shoved him back until his legs hit the bed. "Why do I know your voice? Why do I remember you?" She was terrifyingly strong. Caleb could see the desperation in her eyes when this wasn't a political interrogation, this was a personal crisis. "I don't know," Caleb said, his voice rising. "I've never met you. I've never been to this planet before today." "Liar," she hissed. She released him, pacing away, her hands raking through her violet hair. "I have a memory I was told never happened. I was a child. There was smoke, fire, the smell of burning plastic, and you were there." Caleb froze. The description hit him like a physical blow. Smoke, fire, burning plastic. He stared at her back, the way she held her shoulders, the specific shade of violet in her hair. "Wait," Caleb said quietly. Nixara stopped pacing and turned to face him. 7 years ago, Caleb said, his voice hollow. "I was 25. I was serving on the USC Horizon. It was a humanitarian medical ship. We picked up a distress signal from a drifting cruiser in the indeterminate zone of the Viridian sector." Nixara's eyes widened. The cruiser was unmarked. Caleb continued, the memory surfacing through the fog of years. "It was burning. The life support was failing. My captain ordered a boarding party to search for survivors. I wasn't a soldier, but I spoke the trade dialects, so they sent me." He took a step toward her. The corridors were filled with acrid smoke. "I found a secure stateroom. The door was jammed. I pried it open. There was a girl inside, maybe 12 or 13 years old. Terrified. She was clutching a blanket. Nixara was trembling now. I picked her up," Caleb said softly. "She was light. She was coughing. I carried her through the fire to the shuttle. She was screaming for her mother. To calm her down, I sang to her, a stupid song my mother used to sing to me." Nixara's voice was a whisper. "The stars are sleeping. Little bear." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yes, that was the song. I got her to the horizon," Caleb said. "We treated her for smoke inhalation, but then an Imperial warship dropped out of warp. They hailed us. They demanded the stolen cargo. They threatened to vaporize us." Caleb looked down at his hands. "Our captain surrendered her. We had no choice. But before they took her back, the Imperial officers boarded our ship. They lined us up. They used a neural flash device. They said it was standard protocol to protect the identity of the royal family. They wiped our memories of the encounter." He looked up at Nixara. "I didn't remember any of this until you just said the word smoke. The block. It cracked." Nixara stared at him, tears spilling over her lashes. "They told me I was hallucinating," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "They told me I had been sick with fever, that the fire was a nightmare. They erased you, but they couldn't erase the feeling of being safe." She took a step toward him. "You promised me," she whispered, "in the shuttle. You held my hand and you said, 'I won't leave you.'" "I didn't know who you were," Caleb said, his heart aching for the terrified child she had been. I just wanted you to be brave. I held on to that, Nixara said, for 7 years while they trained me, while they put these collars on me, while they turned me into a statue for their court. I held on to the ghost of a human man who was the only person to ever touch me without wanting something from me. She was standing too close now. The air between them crackled with tension. Caleb could smell that electric storm scent again, sharper now, fueled by adrenaline and grief. He looked down at her, and for a moment, the political danger vanished. There was only the woman in front of him, scarred by the same memory he had just recovered. She looked up at him, her gaze dropping to his lips, then back to his eyes. Her body swayed toward him, a magnetic pull that terrified him. Caleb felt his own body react, a surge of heat that had nothing to do with diplomacy. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to finish the rescue he had started 7 years ago. But he remembered where he was. He forced himself to step back. "Your Highness," he said, his voice rough. "You cannot be here. If they find you, if they find us..." Nixara blinked, the haze of emotion clearing slightly. She looked at the space between them, realizing how close she had come to closing it. "Unauthorized hugging is a Class C misdemeanor," a cheerful, synthetic voice announced from the corner of the room. Caleb and Nixara both jumped, spinning around, hovering in the corner. Previously blending in with the white furniture was a small, spherical droid with a single glowing blue eye. "I am Mirth, Palace Protocol Assistant Unit 7, the droid chirped. "I am assigned to ensure your comfort, Interpreter Rains. I am obligated to inform you that physical contact with the princess is punishable by mild disintegration in historic cases. Current sentencing guidelines suggest indefinite imprisonment in the crystal mines of agony. Would you like some tea?" Nixara stared at the droid for a second, stunned. Then, a sound escaped her throat. It was a laugh. It was rusty and sharp, but it was undeniably human. "Mild disintegration," she repeated, a genuine smile breaking through her mask of trauma. She looked back at Caleb, and the softness in her face hardened into resolve. "They erased our history, Caleb," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My mother, or someone close to her, wiped your mind and gaslit me for years. They didn't just want to hide my kidnapping, they wanted to hide us." "Why?" Caleb asked. "I don't know," Nixara said. "But I'm going to find out, and to do that, I need you alive." She moved to the wall where she had entered. "Stay here. Do not eat anything they bring you unless Mirth scans it first. I will come back." She paused, looking at him over her shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving me from the fire." Then she dissolved through the wall and was gone. Caleb stood in the silence, his heart rate slowly returning to double digits. He looked at Mirth. "Tea would be great. Mirth," he said. As the droid hummed and floated away to prepare the beverage, Caleb walked over to the far wall of the chamber. He ran his hand over the cool, vibrating crystal. He needed to think. He needed a plan. His fingers brushed against an irregularity in the smooth surface. He frowned and leaned closer. Etched into the crystal, near the floor where the light didn't quite reach, was a symbol. It was small, roughly carved, as if scratched by a previous occupant in a hurry. It was a circle with 3 intersecting lines, forming a jagged triangle in the center. Caleb's breath stopped. He knew that symbol. Years ago, during his doctoral research on Earth, he had translated a cache of intercepted deep space transmissions for the intelligence community. They were fragments of chatter from a classified shadow faction, a group of intersystem anarchists and brokers rumored to topple governments from the inside. The file had been redacted so heavily it was mostly black ink. But that symbol was the header on every page, the symbol of the lattice. Caleb stared at the carving. Someone from the most dangerous conspiracy in the galaxy had been in this room. And if Nixara was right about the erased memories, the lattice wasn't just on the frontier. They were already inside the palace. The transition from prisoner to employee was seamless, terrifying, and entirely bureaucratic. Caleb Rains was not thrown into a dungeon. Instead, he was issued a new title, a new wardrobe, and a workspace that felt more like a display case than an office. He was now officially the royal language consultant to the Princess Nixara. It was a title that sounded prestigious on paper but felt distinctly like zoo exhibit in practice. His job, ostensibly, was to help the princess refine her command of frontier dialects for the upcoming negotiations. In reality, it was a surveillance tactic. By keeping him close to Nixara, the queen could watch them both. His office was located in the West Spire, a room with walls made of the same semi-translucent crystal that formed the rest of the palace. It meant he always felt like he was inside a diamond that was slowly digesting him. 2 days after the incident in the throne hall, the door chimed. It slid open to reveal Lady Vespera Kane. The court strategist did not walk. She poured herself into the room. She wore a gown of deep crimson velvet that seemed to absorb the light around her, and her horns were polished to a gleam that matched the dangerous intelligence in her eyes. She held a data slate in one hand, and a smile on her lips that did not reach her gaze. "Mr. Rains," she purred. Her voice was like smoke, smooth and choking. "I trust the accommodations are to your liking?" Caleb stood up from his desk, smoothing the front of his stiff, silver-threaded tunic. "Lady Vespera, they are very comfortable. Thank you." Vespera glided to the window, looking out at the sprawling bioluminescent city below. "The court is abuzz, you know. The way the princess embraced you. It has become quite the romantic ballad among the lower castes. They are calling it a historic affection between species, a symbol of the new unity the Empire so desperately needs." She turned to face him, the smile sharpening at the edges. "I, of course, think it is charming," she continued. "It paints the princess in such a vulnerable light, and vulnerability is so endearing in a child." "Nixara is not a child," Caleb said, keeping his voice neutral. Vespera stepped closer. The air around her grew colder. "In this palace, Mr. Rains, anyone who cannot kill their enemies with a whisper is a child, and children need guidance." She stopped a foot away from him. Caleb could smell her perfume, something musky and metallic, like old blood and expensive spices. "I am here to offer you some friendly advice," Vespera said softly. "You are a novelty right now, a pet. The court loves a pet. But do not mistake this indulgence for safety. If you encourage the princess's delusions, if you allow this biological error to continue, you will find that the Empire has very creative ways of disposing of unnecessary tools." She reached out and adjusted the collar of his tunic. Her fingers were cold. "Behave like a tool, Caleb, not a romance. Tools survive. Romances end in tragedies. That is a universal constant, is it not?" She patted his chest, right over his heart, and then turned and left the room without waiting for a response. The door slid shut, leaving Caleb standing in the silence, the phantom cold of her touch lingering on his skin. He didn't have long to process the threat. 10 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, it was Nixara. She looked different than she had in the throne hall. She had traded the ceremonial armor for a sleek, dark flight suit that hugged her frame, though the humming gold collars, the limiters, remained on her neck and wrists. Her expression was tight, her eyes scanning the hallway behind her before she stepped inside and locked the door. "We are going for a walk," she announced. "A walk?" Caleb asked, grabbing his translator earpiece. "I thought we had a lesson on the Viridian syntax." "We do," Nixara said. "The lesson is, don't get lost." She led him out of the office, but not toward the main corridors. She took him to a service lift that dropped them 50 floors in seconds. When the doors opened, the polished luxury of the upper palace was gone. They stepped onto a narrow walkway suspended over a glowing, violet void. Massive crystalline conduits pulsed around them, humming with a sound that vibrated in Caleb's teeth. The air was hot and smelled of ozone. Drones zipped past them, carrying repair equipment, ignoring the humans entirely. "This is the sub-layer," Nixara explained, her voice fighting to be heard over the hum. "The Astraeum Palace isn't just a building, Caleb, it is a machine. It draws geothermal energy from the planet's core and channels it into the planetary defense grid." She walked fast, her boots clanging on the metal grate. Caleb hurried to keep up, looking down into the abyss. It seemed to go on forever. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because up there," Nixara said, pointing a thumb toward the ceiling, "everything is a lie. The smiles, the protocols, the silence. Down here, the machine is honest. It either works or it breaks." She led him to a heavy circular door set into a wall of raw obsidian. There was no handle, no keypad, only a small concave depression in the center of the stone. "The archive of broken lines," Nixara said quietly. "It is where the family stores the histories we are legally required to keep but culturally forbidden to see." She pulled a small silver knife from her belt. Before Caleb could object, she drew the blade across her left palm. A line of bright teal-colored blood welled up. She pressed her hand into the depression. The stone hissed. It didn't just accept the blood, it drank it. The liquid was sucked into the pores of the rock, and the obsidian began to glow with a deep, rhythmic red light. "Biometric lock, tuned to the genetic markers of the direct line," Nixara said, wrapping a cloth around her hand. "My mother thinks no one comes down here because the air scrubbers are inefficient." The heavy door groaned and rolled aside. The room inside was small, lined with rows of memory crystals. In the center was a holographic projector table. Nixara moved to it, her movements practiced. She slotted a crystal into the interface. "This file was flagged for deletion 7 years ago," she said. "But the system archived it instead because of a glitch. Or maybe because the machine has more of a conscience than the queen." A hologram flickered to life above the table. The image was grainy, taken from the perspective of a security camera. It showed a chaotic scene, a corridor filled with smoke, flashing red emergency lights. Caleb watched, mesmerized. On the screen, a younger Nixara, barely a teenager, terrified, clutching a stuffed animal, was being dragged by a panicked royal guard. Then, the wall exploded. Debris flew everywhere. The guard went down. Through the smoke, a figure emerged, a human man in a torn flight suit, coughing, waving smoke away from his face. It was Caleb, 7 years younger. He watched his younger self kneel beside the alien girl. He saw himself check her for injuries. He saw his younger self say something, though the audio was corrupted. He saw the way the young Nixara clung to his arm, burying her face in his jacket. Then the scene cut. The footage jumped forward. They were in a medical bay. The young Nixara was sleeping on a bio bed. The younger Caleb was arguing with an imperial officer. The officer raised a device, a silver flash stick. Caleb watched himself freeze. His eyes went blank. He slumped into a chair. The recording ended. Caleb let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It wasn't just a story anymore. It wasn't just a vague feeling. It was documented fact. It was policy, Caleb whispered. They didn't just wipe me. They wiped the entire crew. Nixara leaned against the table, staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. It wasn't an accident, she said, her voice trembling slightly. They were terrified. Of what? Caleb asked. Of a human saving a princess? Is that so shameful? Nixara turned to him. The look in her eyes was a mixture of fear and a deep, simmering heat that made Caleb's mouth go dry. You don't understand our biology, Caleb. Among my people, gratitude is an emotion, but survival is a bond. She took a step toward him. In the dim light of the archive, her eyes seemed to glow. When a member of the royal line faces death and is saved by another, our physiology reacts. It releases a specific pheromone marker. It initiates a biological imperative to protect the savior, and for the savior to protect us. It is the basis of our mating rituals. It is called the Kietvara, the life-debt bond. Caleb stared at her. You mean, I mean that when you saved me from the fire. My body recognized you as a mate, Nixara said bluntly. A compatible protector. The court doesn't care about romance, Caleb. They care about genetics. If the High Council knew that I had imprinted on a human, a species they consider primitive, they would declare me unfit to rule. Or worse. Worse? They would weaponize it, she whispered. If they know I am bonded to you, they can control me by hurting you. She reached out, her hand hovering over his wrist. Her fingers trembled. She touched his skin, her fingertips brushing the pulse point. A jolt of electricity went through Caleb so strong he almost jumped. It wasn't static, it was biological. His heart hammered, a sudden, violent rhythm against his ribs. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to step between her and the door, to check the shadows for threats. Nixara snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. She clutched it to her chest, breathing hard. You feel it, she said. The instinct. Caleb gripped the edge of the table where his brain was screaming at him to run, but his body wanted to pull her close. It was a terrifying loss of autonomy. I feel it, he admitted, his voice rough. I can't turn it off, Nixara said, tears welling in her eyes. I have tried. For 7 years. I have felt this missing piece, and now you are here, and it is taking everything I have not to shatter these limiters and tear this palace apart to keep you safe. She looked so strong, yet so incredibly fragile in that moment. The warrior princess who could run across a throne room was terrified of her own biology. Caleb made a choice. He pushed the biological imperative down, burying it under the discipline of a man who had negotiated peace treaties while looking down the barrel of a plasma rifle. He stepped forward, not to hold her, but to stand beside her. We don't let them use it, he said firmly. Nixara looked up at him. How? We use the truth, Caleb said. We find out who ordered the wipe. We find out who is manipulating the queen. If this bond is real, then we use it. We protect each other. But we do it with our eyes open. He held out his hand, not a caress. A handshake, a partnership. I promise you, Nixara, I am not going anywhere. We figure this out together. Nixara looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. She slowly reached out and took his hand. Her grip was iron strong. Together, she repeated. The moment hung between them, heavy and sacred. It felt like a vow. The political reality of the Astraeum Palace, however, had no respect for sacred vows. It demanded dinner parties. That evening, a banquet was held to honor the frontier delegates. It was a test run for the peace summit. Caleb, as the consultant, was required to attend. Nixara was there, seated at the high table, looking regal and distant. Caleb was seated among the minor nobility, a position that allowed him to be ignored by the important people and scrutinized by the bored ones. He was doing well until the dessert course. The Duke of Kalor, a massive reptilian humanoid with a face that looked like it had been put through a wood chipper, leaned across the table. "So, the human," the Duke rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "You are the one the princess favors. Tell me, do you find our architecture pleasing? Or is it too sophisticated for your mud hut sensibilities?" Caleb smiled politely. "The architecture is stunning. Your Grace? It reminds me of the crystalline structures of the Antares Nebula. Though, I must say, your personal history is even more impressive." Caleb gestured to the jagged silvery scars that ran down the Duke's snout. "Those scars are beautiful," Caleb said, genuinely trying to be complimentary. "They speak of great battles survived." The table went dead silent. The Duke's yellow eyes widened. His gills flared a bright, angry red. "You mock me?" the Duke roared, slamming a fist onto the table. Caleb blinked. "What? No, He calls my bankruptcy beautiful," the Duke shouted to the room. "He laughs at my financial ruin." Caleb looked around, bewildered. A helpful whisper from Mirth, who was hovering behind his chair, clarified the situation. "Master Rains," Mirth chirped, "in Kalor culture, facial scarring is exclusively the result of ritualistic self-mutilation performed to atone for losing vast sums of money. You have essentially told him that his poverty is very fetching." "Oh," Caleb whispered. The Duke was standing now, reaching for a serrated knife. Suddenly, a laugh rang out. It was Nixara. She was leaning back in her chair at the high table, swirling a glass of nectar. "Sit down." "Duke," she called out, her voice lazy and amused. The human uses a metaphor from his own world, on Earth. "Scars is a slang term for wisdom lines. He was complimenting your experience in navigating the treacherous markets." She looked at Caleb, one eyebrow raised. "Isn't that right?" "Mr. Rains?" Caleb swallowed. "Absolutely, Your Highness. Financial wisdom, the most beautiful kind." The Duke grunted, confused but placated by the princess's intervention. He sat down, muttering about the confusing nature of mammalian linguistics. Caleb let out a breath. Nixara caught his eye from across the room and gave a microscopic wink. Even from this distance, he could feel the connection between them, a tether that tugged at his chest. But the levity didn't last. At the head of the room, the ambassador from the frontier system stood up to make a toast. He raised a goblet of blue wine. "To the Queen," he announced, "and to the end of tyranny." He drank. 2 seconds later, he dropped the goblet. He clawed at his throat. Foam, bright pink and sizzling, erupted from his lips. He collapsed onto the table, convulsing violently. The room exploded into chaos. Guards drew weapons. Nobles screamed and scrambled over chairs. "Poison!" someone shouted. "Seal the doors!" Caleb was on his feet instantly. He looked toward the high table. Nixara was already moving, her limiters flashing red as her heart rate spiked. She was standing in front of her mother, shielding the Queen with her own body. "Lock down!" Queen Elira's voice cut through the panic. "Secure the hall!" The massive doors slammed shut. Mirth floated down to Caleb's eye level. "Analysis complete," the droid said calmly. "The toxin is distinct. It is Nightshade 9, a nerve agent." "Where does it come from?" Caleb asked, scanning the room. "That is the interesting part," Mirth said. It is a proprietary compound manufactured only within the royal medical vaults. It cannot be imported. Caleb's blood ran cold. It wasn't an attack from the frontier. It was an inside job. The aftermath was a blur of interrogations and security sweeps. The summit was suspended. The palace was placed under martial law. Caleb was escorted back to his quarters. But he didn't stay there. He waited until the guard rotation shifted, then slipped out. He met Nixara in the shadow of a ventilation stack on the roof of the west spire. She was pacing, her flight suit torn at the shoulder from where she had shoved a panic-stricken noble out of the way. It was Nightshade 9, Caleb said as soon as he saw her. Mirth confirmed it. It came from inside the palace. Nixara stopped pacing. I know. Vespera controls the medical vault's key codes. But why kill the ambassador? Caleb asked. It destroys the peace talks. Exactly, Nixara said. Chaos is a ladder. If the peace talks fail, the frontier attacks. If the frontier attacks, the Queen declares a state of emergency. And in a state of emergency, the line of succession can be adjusted. She looked at Caleb, her face pale in the starlight. They aren't trying to start a war. Caleb, they are trying to trigger a civil crisis so they can declare me unfit to rule. They will say I am too unstable, too bonded to a human, too erratic to lead a war effort. They will install a regent, Vespera, Caleb realized. We have to warn your mother, Caleb said. She needs to know it's Vespera. She won't believe me without proof, Nixara said. But there is a terminal in the south wing, the security hub. If Vespera accessed the vaults, her digital footprint will be there. Let's go, Caleb said. They moved through the shadows. The palace was on high alert, drones sweeping the hallways with searchlights. Nixara knew the blind spots. She led him through service corridors and maintenance hatches, moving with a predator's grace. They reached the corridor leading to the security hub. It was a long, narrow tunnel of white ceramic, brightly lit. Wait, Nixara said, holding up a hand. What? It's empty, she said. There should be guards here. Before Caleb could respond, the lights in the corridor flickered and died. Emergency red lighting bathed the walls. Blast doors slammed shut at both ends of the corridor. They were trapped. A section of the ceiling slid open. 4 figures dropped down. They were not royal guards. They were dressed in matte black stealth suits, their faces covered by featureless silver masks. In their hands, they held weapons that looked like hilts of vibrating air. Phase blades, Nixara hissed. They cut through matter by vibrating between dimensions. The assassins didn't speak. They moved in perfect synchronization. 2 lunged for Nixara, 2 for Caleb. Caleb scrambled back, looking for a weapon, anything. He was a linguist, not a soldier. Nixara didn't scramble. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of rage. And as she screamed, the gold collars on her wrists and neck flashed a blinding white. Click. The limiters unlocked. They fell to the floor with a heavy clatter. For a second, the air around Nixara distorted, as if the heat radiating from her body was bending the light. Her eyes glowed with that terrifying violet luminosity. She moved so fast Caleb could barely track her. She ducked under the first phase blade, the hum of the weapon passing inches from her ear. She grabbed the assassin's arm. There was a sickening crunch of bone. She used the assassin's body as a shield to block a strike from the second attacker, then kicked the second man in the chest with enough force to send him flying 20 feet down the hall. But the 2 attacking Caleb were closing in. Caleb dodged a slash that would have taken his head off, the blade singing past his ear. He tripped, falling backward. The assassin raised the blade for a killing stroke. No! Nixara roared. She leaped. She cleared the distance in a single bound, landing between Caleb and the blade. She caught the assassin's wrist. Skin touched skin. Caleb felt the jolt from across the floor. The assassin screamed as Nixara twisted his arm, disarming him, and then drove her elbow into his helmet. The mask shattered. The fourth assassin paused, realizing the odds had shifted. He threw a smoke grenade and vanished into a vent shaft in the confusion. Nixara stood amidst the unconscious bodies, her chest heaving. The air around her was crackling with static electricity. She looked down at her hands, shaking. "The system unlocked them," she whispered. "The palace security grid. It detected a threat to my life and disengaged the limiters." "That's good, right?" Caleb asked, scrambling to his feet. "No," Nixara said, turning to him. Her eyes were wild. "It means the system knew there would be violence here. The ambush. It was logged in the schedule." She looked at the blast doors. They were starting to open. More guards would be coming, and they wouldn't be friendly. "We have to go," she said. "Now." "Where?" "Down." She pried open a maintenance grate in the floor. "Mirth," Caleb called out into the air. "We need a route." The little droid materialized from the ceiling, looking unperturbed. "I strongly advise against the waste disposal chutes," Mirth said. "They are currently cycling organic matter. However, the ventilation shaft to the tertiary cooling array is clear." "Lead the way," Caleb yelled. They dropped into the shaft just as the blast doors opened and laser fire scored the wall where they had been standing. They slid down a steep metal incline, tumbling into a cavernous space filled with roaring fans and coolant pipes. They ran along a catwalk, the sound of pursuit echoing above them. "This is unscheduled sprinting," Mirth complained, floating alongside them. "My battery is not optimized for high-velocity chases. I am a protocol droid, not a fitness instructor." "Shut up." "Mirth," Caleb and Nixara said in unison. They found a terminal station tucked away in an alcove near the cooling pumps. It was an old maintenance interface, dusty and forgotten. Nixara jacked into it. "I need to see the logs," she said, her fingers flying over the holographic keys. "I need to see who authorized the ambush." She pulled up the security file for the corridor. Her hands stopped. "What is it?" Caleb asked, leaning over her shoulder. Nixara stared at the screen. Her face went slack with shock. "The authorization code," she whispered. "It's not Vespera's." Caleb looked at the code. It was a complex string of golden glyphs. "It's the Queen's," Nixara said, her voice breaking. "My mother authorized the security blackout in that corridor." She swiped to the next page of the file. It was a command directive. Subject, Caleb Rains. Status, bond risk. Directive, if bond confirmation occurs, if the subject displays protective pheromone response or physical intimacy exceeds Class 4 parameters. Initiate termination protocol. Caleb stared at the words. Initiate termination protocol. The Queen hadn't just allowed the ambush. She had set a trap. "She knows," Nixara whispered. "She knows about the bond, and she ordered them to kill you if it became real." Caleb felt a cold knot in his stomach. The woman he had met in the throne room. The calm, polite Queen. She had signed his death warrant. "We can't go back to her," Caleb said. "She's not being manipulated. She's part of it." Nixara pulled her hand away from the console. She looked at Caleb. The trust in her eyes was the only thing holding her together. "Then we run," she said. "We leave the palace. Where do we go?" "To the only place the Queen's eyes can't see," Nixara said. "The mirror market." She turned and ran toward the service airlock, Caleb close behind her. Above them, the palace alarms began to wail, a mournful, deafening sound that signaled the hunt had begun. The terminal screen glowed with a toxic red light in the damp shadows of the cooling array. illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between them. Caleb stared at the words that had just dismantled his understanding of the last 48 hours. Initiate termination protocol. It was not a forgery. It was not a mistake. It was a digital guillotine blade signed by the hand of the Queen herself. Nixara stood frozen, her face illuminated by the harsh readout. She looked less like a warrior princess in that moment and more like a statue cracking under the weight of an invisible hammer. Her mother, the woman who had birthed her, raised her, and theoretically protected her, had pre-authorized the murder of the man Nixara was biologically compelled to love. She knew, Nixara whispered, the words scraping out of her throat. She knew the bond was possible. She did not just erase you from my memory 7 years ago to protect the timeline. She did it to ensure I remained a weapon she could aim. And if the weapon malfunctioned by falling in love, she authorized the removal of the malfunction. Caleb reached out, gripping her shoulder. The fabric of her flight suit was cold, but the skin beneath it radiated a feverish heat. Nixara, listen to me, Caleb said, his voice urgent but steady. We do not know the context. Your mother is playing a game of three-dimensional chess while the rest of the court is playing checkers. Context. Nixara spun on him, her violet eyes blazing with a mixture of betrayal and fury. The context is dead in this sentence. Caleb, termination. That is not a political maneuver. That is a funeral arrangement. She cannot be the enemy, Caleb insisted, though his own conviction was wavering. If she wanted me dead, I would have been vaporized in the throne hall. She is the queen. She does not need secret protocols to execute a translator. She is protecting something bigger than us. Or she is just a tyrant who prefers her daughters compliant and her secrets buried. Nixara snapped. She pulled away from his touch, pacing the small metal grate of the maintenance platform. We have to go. The ambush in the secure corridor failed. The system will alert the Royal Guard within minutes. She moved to a locker set into the wall, ripping the metal door off its hinges with a casual display of strength that made Caleb flinch. Inside hung the drab gray jumpsuits of the waste disposal maintenance crews. Put this on, she commanded, tossing one to him. Caleb caught the heavy synthetic fabric. It smelled of industrial solvent and stale air. Where are we going? To the one place where the Queen's eyes are blind, Nixara said, pulling the gray suit over her royal flight gear. We are going to the mirror market. The escape was an exercise in terrifying banality. They did not fight their way out. They walked, dressed in the nondescript gray of the lowest caste, heads bowed, carrying toolkits Nixara had scavenged. They merged into the flow of service traffic. They moved through the bowels of the palace, walking along vast arterial corridors where automated sleds carried refuse and recycling. Drones drifted overhead, scanning faces every time a blue scanning beam swept over them. Caleb held his breath, waiting for the siren, for the searing heat of a plasma bolt. But the disguise held. To the palace security system, they were just biological cogs in the machine, invisible by virtue of their insignificance. They reached the secondary hangar bay, a cavernous space filled with transport skiffs and long-range couriers. Nixara bypassed the sleek royal yachts and headed for the far wall, where impounded vessels were kept in magnetic clamps. She stopped in front of a ship that looked like a bruised beetle. It was small, painted a peeling matte black, with engines that looked too big for its frame. The Eidolon, Nixara said. It was seized from a smuggler last week, fast, ugly, and unregistered. She placed her hand on the hull. She didn't have a key, but she didn't need one. She closed her eyes, and Caleb watched as the faint bioelectric aura of her royal lineage interacted with the ship's locking mechanism. The hatch hissed and popped open. Inside, the cockpit was cramped, smelling of hot electronics and old coffee. Nixara slid into the pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the controls. "System wake," she commanded. The dashboard flickered. A holographic avatar materialized on the console. It was a simple geometric shape, a pyramid of blue light that pulsed with a slow, sarcastic rhythm. "Unauthorized biometric signature detected," the ship's AI announced. The voice was smooth, synthetic, and dripping with disdain. "You are not Captain Vax. Captain Vax has sweatier palms and significantly less royal DNA. Override code Alpha Zero Nightshade," Nixara said, strapping herself in. "Override accepted." The AI replied, "Welcome, Your Highness," and the AI paused, its sensor eye swiveling to Caleb, who was squeezing into the co-pilot seat. "Your bad decision. My name is Caleb." "Noted," the AI said. "I am designated Heuristic Universal System Handler. You may call me Hush. I assume we are stealing me." "We are commandeering you," Nixara corrected. "Get the engines hot. We leave in 30 seconds. Statistically, stealing a ship from the Imperial hangar results in death 94% of the time," Hush noted cheerfully as the engines roared to life. "I look forward to our brief partnership." The hangar doors were beginning to close. The alarm had finally sounded. Klaxons wailed, echoing off the high ceiling. "Hold on!" Nixara yelled. She slammed the throttle forward. The Eidolon didn't just accelerate, it kicked. Caleb was slammed back into his seat as the ship shot forward, scraping the bottom of the closing blast doors with a shower of sparks. They burst out into the violet sky, the G-force pressing the air from Caleb's lungs. They were not alone. 3 interceptors, sleek, predatory triangles of silver, peeled off from the palace patrol and dove after them. "Targets acquired," Hush announced. "They are arming disruption missiles. Shall I compose a eulogy?" "Fly the ship!" Caleb shouted. "I am flying," Hush retorted. "The princess is the one aiming for that debris field." Nixara was banking hard toward the planet's ring system. The Astraeum Prime Ring was not just dust. It was a hazardous scrapyard of ancient mining satellites and crystal shards the size of office buildings. "If we go into the ring, we lose their tracking lock," Nixara shouted over the roar of the engines. "Or we become confetti," Caleb yelled back. Nixara grinned. It was a wild, desperate look. "Trust me." She dove the ship into the storm of glittering debris. It was suicide. Giant shards of crystal tumbled through the void, reflecting the starlight in blinding flashes. Nixara wove the ship through the chaos with impossible reflexes, the Eidolon rolling and spinning to avoid impacts that would have vaporized them. The interceptors followed, but they were machines flying on logic algorithms. They could not predict the desperate intuition of a pilot flying on pure adrenaline. One interceptor clipped a spinning satellite and disintegrated in a silent blossom of fire. The other 2 pulled up, unable to navigate the density of the field. "We are clear," Hush announced. "My hull integrity is compromised by 12%, and I believe I have vomited virtual coolant." Nixara eased back on the throttle, her hands shaking slightly on the stick. "We made it." She looked over at Caleb. He was pale, gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. "You okay?" she asked softly. Caleb exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. "I am never complaining about airline turbulence again." The mirror market was not a place found on any official map. It was a cluster of pressurized habitats lashed together in the orbital shadow of the planet's largest moon. It was a city of outcasts, spies, and merchants who traded in the one commodity the Empire could not regulate: truth. They docked at a rust-streaked pier. The air inside the station was thick with incense and the hum of neon signs written in a dozen forbidden languages. People moved through the narrow, crowded streets with their hoods up. Cybernetically enhanced mercenaries, disgraced scholars, and hooded figures trading glowing vials of memory fluid. Nixara led Caleb through the labyrinthine alleys to a door marked with a fading hologram of a weeping eye. She knocked, a complex rhythm of 3 taps, a pause, and 2 scrapes. The door opened. A woman stood there. She was tall, with skin like polished obsidian and cybernetic implants that traced silver lines across her jaw and throat. She wore the robes of a priestess, but a heavy blaster was strapped to her hip. "Nixara," the woman said, her voice raspy. "You look terrible." "Hello." "Sarah," Nixara said, leaning against the doorframe. "I need a sanctuary, and I need a drink." Sarah Vaughn stepped aside, ushering them into a dim room cluttered with data stacks and religious idols. She locked the door and turned to Caleb, eyeing him up and down. "So this is the human," Sarah said, "the one who broke the court." "Caleb Rains," Caleb said, extending a hand. Sarah ignored the hand. "I am Sarah Vaughn. I run information, and I owe the princess a debt for not executing my brother when she had the chance. Sit down before you fall down." They sat around a low table. Sarah poured a clear viscous liquid into 3 glasses. "The lattice," Nixara said without preamble. "We found their mark in the palace." Sarah froze. She set the bottle down slowly. "You saw the mark?" "In the guest wing," Caleb said. "And we have reason to believe they are working with Lady Vespera." Sarah sighed, sinking into a chair. "The lattice. We thought they were a myth, a ghost story for the nobility. But lately, the market has been flooded with high-grade memory wipes. Not the medical kind, the weaponized kind." She looked at Caleb. "That is why you are here, isn't it? Because you are the key." "Me?" Caleb asked. "I'm just a translator. You are a human," Sarah corrected. "Your species has a chaotic neural architecture. It is messy, redundant, and stubbornly analog in places. Most imperial mind wipes work by rewriting synaptic pathways. But human pathways? They have a tendency to reboot, to restore the backup." She tapped her temple. "You are one of the few beings in the galaxy who can resist a standard lattice wipe. That makes you dangerous. That makes you a living key to everything they have tried to erase." Caleb sat back, the realization settling in. That was why the wipe 7 years ago hadn't held. That was why the Queen wanted him dead. He wasn't just a romantic liability, he was a walking evidence locker. "We need to see what they are planning," Nixara said. "We need to buy a memory." Sarah nodded. "I have something. It just came in this morning. A broker pulled it from a dead guard's implant. It is expensive." "Put it on my tab," Nixara said dryly. "I am good for it. I own a planet." The safe house was small, consisting of the main room and a tiny sleeping cabin in the back. While Sarah decrypted the memory shard, Nixara and Caleb retreated to the cabin to clean up. The space was impossibly small. The bunk was narrow, and the walls seemed to press in. The air was recycled, warm and intimate. Nixara sat on the edge of the bunk, scrubbing a smudge of grease from her cheek. She looked exhausted. The adrenaline of the escape was fading, leaving behind the raw, bleeding wound of her mother's betrayal. Caleb stood by the closed door, trying to give her space, but there was no space to give. "I hate this," Nixara whispered, not looking up. "The running?" Caleb asked gently. "The wanting," she said. She looked up at him, her eyes dark and unguarded. "My life is falling apart. My mother ordered my execution. My empire is crumbling. And all I can think about is how much I want you to touch me again." She stood up. The distance between them evaporated. "It is selfish," she said, stepping closer. "It is a distraction. I hate myself for it." "It's not selfish," Caleb said, his voice low. "It's human, or whatever the word is for you. It's real." Nixara reached out, her hand hovering inches from his chest. She didn't touch him. The air between them hummed with that same electric tension from the throne room. But this time, there were no guards, no queen, no protocols, just the heat of two bodies in a cold universe. Caleb watched her throat work as she swallowed. He could smell the ozone scent of her skin, mixed now with the metallic tang of the ship. He wanted to close the gap. He wanted to wrap his arms around her and hold her until the shaking stopped. But he didn't. He respected the line she was drawing, even as she leaned across it. "If I start," Nixara whispered, gazing at his lips, "I do not think I can stop." "Then don't stop," Caleb breathed. She leaned in. Their breath mingled, her eyes fluttered closed. Caleb raised his hand to cup her cheek. "Reminder." Hush's voice boomed from the console on the wall, shattering the moment like glass. "Royal reproduction politics are statistically messy. Please consider birth control. Also, the smuggler woman says the memory shard is ready. That is all." Nixara froze. Caleb froze. Then, Nixara let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She pressed her forehead against Caleb's chest, her shoulders shaking. "I am going to dismantle that AI," she mumbled into his shirt. "Later," Caleb said, a smile tugging at his own lips. "After we save the galaxy." Nixara pulled back, wiping her eyes. She looked at him, and the desperate heat had cooled into something warmer, steadier. "Thank you," she said softly. "For stopping." "I didn't stop," Caleb said honestly. "I just paused." Nixara smiled, a real fleeting smile, and then the mask of the princess slid back into place. "Let's go see what Vespera is hiding." Sarah had loaded the memory shard into a projector on the main table. The hologram flickered to life, bathing the room in blue light. It was a recording of a meeting. The setting was Lady Vespera's private sanctum. Vespera was there, seated in a high-backed chair. Standing before her was General Cale Thorne, the commander of the Imperial fleet. "The time for subtlety is over," Vespera was saying. "The Queen is hesitating. She clings to the old ways. She believes the cryostom technology is too dangerous." "Dangerous?" General Thorne scoffed. "It is order, pure distilled order." Vespera stood up, activating a schematic in the center of the room. It was a rotating 3D model of a device. It looked like a crown, but the spines were needles designed to interface directly with the skull. The cryostom crown. Vespera purred. The ancients used it to stop the rage plague. They froze the neural pathways of entire cities to prevent the spread of violence. "We will use it to prevent the spread of dissent," the general nodded. "We trigger the device during the succession convergence. The dampening field will cover the capital, the court, the guards, the queen. They will all be pacified, their higher cognitive functions suspended. They will be awake, but they will be unable to act, unable to rebel." "And then?" the general asked. "Then we announce the regency," Vespera said. "We declare Nixara mentally unstable and the queen unfit. By the time the field is lowered, the laws will be rewritten. The empire will be safe, frozen in a perfect stasis of obedience." The recording ended. Silence filled the safe house. "They are not just staging a coup," Nixara whispered, horror dawning on her face. "They are going to lobotomize the entire government. It's mass enslavement," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "A prison of the mind." "We have to stop them," Caleb said. "We have to destroy that device." Nixara looked at the empty space where the hologram had been. No, she said slowly. We don't just destroy it, we take it. Take it? Caleb asked. If we control the crown, we control the court, Nixara said, her voice hard. We can use it to freeze Vespera. We can use it to force the generals to stand down. We can use their own weapon to save the throne. Caleb looked at her. He saw the shift in her eyes, the desperation turning into ruthlessness. No, Caleb said. Nixara turned to him. What? We don't use it, Caleb said firmly. That thing violates the most basic right of a sentient being, the right to think, the right to choose. If we use it, even for a good reason, we are no better than them. Nixara stepped closer, her jaw set. Caleb, this is war. Survival isn't pretty. If we don't use every advantage, we die, and the empire falls. Survival isn't victory if it costs you your soul, Caleb argued, stepping to meet her. You want to be a queen? Then you have to be better than the monsters you are fighting. You can't start your reign by freezing people's minds. And mercy gets you killed, Nixara shouted. Look where mercy got my mother. She tried to protect me, and now her own advisor is planning to turn her into a vegetable. They stood chest to chest, the argument hanging in the air like smoke. It was the fundamental clash of their worlds, the human idealist and the alien pragmatist. Caleb softened his voice. I am not asking you to be weak, Nixara. I am asking you to be the leader who breaks the cycle, not the one who just changes the color of the chains. Nixara stared at him. She looked furious, but beneath the anger there was a flicker of doubt. She turned away, staring at the wall. We need allies, she said finally, dodging the concession. There is a loyalist, Archduke Heron. He commands the palace guard. If I can reach him, if I can show him this proof. Send the message, Sarah said. I have an encrypted channel. They sent the message, a burst transmission, coded with Nixara's personal cipher. 10 minutes later, a reply came back. Princess, thank the stars. I am secure. Meet me at Sector 4, the old cargo tram station. I have a team. We will extract you. Heron. Nixara let out a breath of relief. He is with us. Caleb stared at the message. He frowned. What is it? Nixara asked. Read it again. Caleb said, thank the stars. Yes? Caleb looked at her. In the throne hall, Valerius told me the queen is called the matriarch of stars. It's a formal title. Does Heron usually use religious slang? Nixara hesitated. No. He is an atheist. He usually says thank the void or thank logic. She looked at the screen. The phrasing was subtle, just slightly wrong, like someone trying to sound like an imperial noble but missing the nuance. It's a trap, Nixara whispered. He's been turned, or he's dead. Before they could react, the door to the safe house exploded. The metal warped inward, glowing white-hot, and blew off its hinges. Smoke filled the room. Go! Sarah screamed, flipping the table for cover and drawing her blaster. 3 figures stormed in. They were not wearing palace guard armor. They wore the matte gray stealth suits of the Lattice agents. Sarah fired. A bolt of red plasma took the lead agent in the chest, dropping him. But more were pouring in from the alley. The back way, Sarah shouted, firing blindly into the smoke. She kicked open a rug, revealing a trapdoor. Into the tunnels, Sarah yelled. Nixara grabbed Caleb's arm and dragged him toward the hole. Sarah, come on, I'll hold them, Sarah roared, her cybernetic eye glowing red as she targeted the doorway. Go! There was no time to argue. Nixara and Caleb dropped into the darkness. They landed in a narrow, damp tunnel lined with bioluminescent moss. The walls were covered in glowing glyphs that pulsed with a chaotic rhythm. "Run!" Nixara ordered. They sprinted. Above them, the sounds of blaster fire and shouting faded, replaced by the damp echo of their own footsteps. The glyphs on the walls seemed to swirl, disorienting the eye. "It's a scrambler tunnel." Nixara panted as they ran. "The moss emits radiation that confuses sensors. They can't track us down here." They ran until their lungs burned, finally emerging into a deserted ventilation chamber miles away from the market center. They collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. "We are safe," Caleb wheezed, sliding down to sit on the floor. "The tunnel. It scrambled their tracking." Nixara didn't answer. She was staring at her arm. She had pushed up the sleeve of her gray jumpsuit. There, on the inside of her wrist, where the golden limiter cuff had sat for 7 years. The skin was red and irritated, but it wasn't just irritation. Beneath the pale skin, something was glowing. A faint, pulsing blue light, moving with the rhythm of her heartbeat. "Nixara?" Caleb asked, sensing the shift in her silence. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with a horror that transcended the fear of death. "The limiters," she whispered. "They weren't just restraints." She touched the glowing spot on her vein. "They were injectors," she said, her voice trembling. "For years. They have been leaching a nanite isotope into my blood." Caleb stared at the blue pulse. "It's a biometric tag," Nixara said, tears spilling over. "It is inside me, Caleb. It is in my blood." The tunnel scrambled their handheld scanners, but the palace satellite network. She looked up at the ceiling, as if she could see through the metal to the orbital grid above. "They know exactly where I am. They have always known. I can never hide." She slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of her. "Unless I drain my own blood, I am walking on a leash that spans the entire planet." Caleb moved to her, taking her hand. He looked at the glowing vein. It was a terrifying piece of technology, a prison built into the prisoner. "Then we stop running," Caleb said, his voice hard. Nixara looked at him. Zara looked. "What?" "If they can see you," Caleb said, his eyes meeting hers with a fierce intensity. "Then let's give them a show they won't forget. We stop hiding, we go back, and we take the crown before they can turn it on." Nixara stared at him. The despair in her eyes slowly morphed into something sharper, something dangerous. "You want to walk into the lion's den?" she asked. "I want to kick the lion in the teeth," Caleb said. Nixara looked at her glowing wrist, then back to Caleb. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "Okay, little bear," she whispered. "Let's go start a riot." The medical clinic was not a place of healing. It was a place of subtraction, located in the deepest rust-streaked sublevel of the mirror market. The room smelled of antiseptic ozone and burning meat. The surgeon was a reconfigured medical drone, a hovering collection of chrome scalpels and laser cauterizers that spoke in a flat, monotone buzz. Nixara lay on the operating table, her arms strapped down. The gray jumpsuit was rolled up to her shoulder, exposing the pale skin of her inner arm where the blue biometric light pulsed with a steady, condemning rhythm. "This will be invasive," the drone announced. "The nanites have bonded to the arterial wall. Extraction requires blood filtration and localized tissue vaporization. Anesthesia is 90% effective." "Do it," Nixara said. Her voice was tight, stripped of all royal inflection. Caleb stood beside her. He had offered to wait outside, but she had gripped his hand with a force that made his bones ache. A silent command to stay. He took her hand now, interlacing his fingers with hers. Her skin was clammy. slick with the sweat of anticipation. The drone descended. A laser tip glowed with a blinding white heat. When the laser touched her skin, Nixara did not scream. She arched her back off the table, a guttural sound of agony trapped in her throat, her teeth grinding together so hard Caleb thought they might shatter. Her grip on his hand tightened until he felt his own circulation cut off. "Look at me," Caleb whispered, leaning close to her ear. "Just look at me." Nixara's eyes flew open. They were dilated, the violet irises swimming in tears of pain. She locked onto his face like a drowning woman finding a lifeline. "It's just a machine," Caleb said, his voice a low, steady rumble against the high-pitched whine of the laser. "It is taking the poison out. You are stronger than it. You are stronger than the palace." The drone whirred, pump cycling as it drew blood, filtered the glowing blue isotopes, and cycled it back. The smell of ozone intensified. "Talk to me," Nixara gasped, her voice ragged. "Say something true." Caleb looked at her, watching the sweat bead on her forehead. "The first time I saw you," Caleb said softly, ignoring the drone digging into her arm. "I thought you looked like a storm trapped in a bottle. I was terrified, not of the queen, of you, because I knew if that bottle broke, nothing in the universe would be left standing." Nixara let out a shaky breath, a ghost of a smile touching her lips even as her body convulsed with a fresh wave of pain. "And now?" she whispered. "Now," Caleb said, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead with his free hand. "I think the bottle is breaking, and I am right where I want to be." The drone beeped. Procedure complete. Nanite saturation at 0%. The laser retracted. Nixara slumped back onto the table, her chest heaving. She pulled her arm free from the restraint and held it up. The skin was angry and red, marred by a fresh, raw burn scar. But the pulsing blue light was gone. She stared at the wound. It was ugly. It was perfect. "I am silent," she whispered. "For the first time in my life. I am silent." She sat up, swaying slightly. Caleb moved to support her, but she waved him off. She slid off the table, her legs shaking but holding. When she looked at him, the change was immediate. The guarded, calculated mask of the princess was gone. In its place was something raw, volatile, and terrifyingly free. She didn't look away. She didn't check the corners of the room for cameras. She looked at him with a hunger she had stopped trying to hide. "Let's go," she said, her voice stronger. "We have a crown to steal." The entrance to the ancient ruins lay beneath the foundation of the Mirror Market, in the structural roots of the Ring City. It was a place where the artificial gravity generators of the modern station met the primordial rock of the asteroid belt. They moved through the shadows of the Undercity, guided by a stolen map Sarah Vaughn had uploaded to their comms. The air grew colder, thinning until their breath misted in front of them. The architecture changed. The sleek, seamless crystal of the Empire gave way to heavy, brutalist stone blocks carved with geometric patterns that hurt the eyes if you stared at them too long. "This is pre-Empire," Nixara said, running her hand along a wall covered in moss that glowed with a faint, sickly green light. "The Vault of Echoes. My history tutors said it was a myth, a tomb for a dead god. They reached a massive circular airlock. It wasn't sealed by biometrics or keypads, and it was sealed by a riddle of weight and balance." Caleb examined the mechanism. It was a series of concentric rings. "We have to move them together," he said. They pushed. The stone ground against stone, a sound like the earth itself groaning. As the rings aligned, the airlock hissed, depressurizing a stale, dry wind that smelled of dust and time. The door rolled open. Inside, Physics had gone to die. It was a cavern of immense size, but the floor was not down. Floating platforms of stone drifted in the air, connected by broken staircases that twisted in impossible directions. Gravity here was subjective. Up was left. Down was a diagonal spiral. In the center of the cavern, suspended in a bubble of perfect stillness, floated a structure that looked like a temple made of black glass. The vault, Nixara breathed. They stepped onto the first platform. Immediately. Caleb felt his stomach lurch. The gravity shifted, pulling him sideways. He stumbled, grabbing Nixara's arm. She held him steady, adjusting her stance with the grace of someone who had trained in zero-G combat. "Don't fight it," she said. "The gravity follows the ley lines. Watch the dust." She pointed. Specks of glowing dust floated in currents, marking the safe paths. They began to climb, jumping from platform to floating stone. It was a dizzying, nauseating ascent. At one point, they were walking on the underside of a staircase, looking up at the abyss below them. Suddenly, the air shimmered. A construct materialized in front of them. It was a golem made of floating geometric shards, glowing with a hostile red light. It didn't have a face, but it had a presence, a crushing wave of psychic pressure. "Security system!" Caleb shouted, reaching for the blaster Sarah had given him. "Don't shoot!" Nixara yelled, slapping his hand down. "It's an empathic guardian. It responds to aggression." The golem raised a limb made of sharp glass shards. The red light intensified, feeding off Caleb's spike of fear. "It creates a feedback loop," Nixara said, her voice tight but controlled. "If you are afraid, it becomes terrifying. If you are angry, it becomes violent." Caleb looked at the towering construct. It was preparing to strike. He forced himself to lower the weapon. He closed his eyes. He thought of the quietest thing he knew. He thought of the library at Stanford, the smell of old paper, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. He breathed out. When he opened his eyes, the golem's red light had faded to a neutral yellow. The shards lowered. It drifted backward, dissolving into the air. "It let us pass," Caleb whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. Nixara looked at him, impressed. "You have good mental shielding for a human." "I just thought about paperwork," Caleb admitted. "Nothing calms the blood like tax forms." Nixara laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the gravity-warped space. They continued, moving deeper into the anomaly until they reached the central temple. The interior of the black glass structure was a single, vast room. In the center, on a pedestal of white marble, sat a console. There was no physical crown, not yet. Nixara approached the console. "This is the fabrication matrix," she said. "The crown isn't just an object, it's a program. The physical device is printed on demand." She accessed the interface. The language was ancient, a precursor to the imperial script. Caleb stepped up beside her, translating the glyphs. It says, "Solution to the Red Plague," Caleb read. He tapped a command. A holographic archive sprang to life above the pedestal. The image showed a species, Nixara's ancestors, tearing each other apart, cities burning. A biological madness that turned every infected individual into a berserker. The voice of the narrator, an ancient scientist, filled the room. "We have failed to cure the rage. Our only option is to freeze the impulse. The cryostem interface will lock the neural pathways responsible for aggression. It will impose peace through paralysis. It is not a crown of kings. It is a medical restraint." Caleb stepped back. "It wasn't a weapon of conquest," he said. "It was a desperate medical intervention. It was designed to save your species from extinction. But now Vespera wants to use it to enslave us," Nixara said, her face grim. She scrolled through the access logs. "Wait," she said. She froze the image. A log entry from 7 years ago. Unauthorized access detected. User biometric signature A1 matriarch. Action subroutine extraction. Memory targeting protocol derived. Nixara stared at the log. Her mother. Caleb leaned in, his mind racing, connecting the dots that had been scattered across the last few days. "She was here," Caleb said slowly. 7 years ago, right after the incident on the ship. Nixara's hands were shaking. She used the tech, she whispered. She took a piece of the cryostom code, the memory targeting protocol. She turned to Caleb. "She used it on you. The mind wipe. It wasn't a standard military flash. It was this ancient tech. That's why it didn't hold perfectly. It was a jury-rigged solution." "Why?" Caleb asked. "Why go to such lengths?" "Because she was afraid," Nixara said, her voice breaking. She pulled up another file linked to the log. It was a simulation. Simulation, bond confirmation, outcome, subject, princess becomes compromised. Tactical vulnerability increased by 300%. Enemy factions will utilize the bond to coerce the throne. Caleb read the words, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. "She wasn't protecting the timeline," Caleb said. "She was protecting you." He looked at Nixara. "The bond. It's a weakness. If Vespra or the Lattice knew we were bonded, they wouldn't just kill me. They would capture me. They would torture me to make you do whatever they wanted. You would surrender the Empire to stop me from screaming." Nixara looked away, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "I would." Caleb stepped closer. "The termination order. The one we found in the security hub. It wasn't hatred. It was a failsafe. If bond confirmation occurs, initiate termination. She would rather kill me than let me become the lever they use to break you," Caleb said. "It's brutal. It's horrific. But it's not betrayal. It's a mother trying to save her daughter from being a puppet." Nixara slammed her fist onto the console. The hologram flickered. "I am tired of being saved," she shouted, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I am tired of being protected like a weapon in a glass case. She erased you to save me. She wants to kill you to save me. She has stripped away every choice I have ever had because she thinks I am too fragile to bear the cost of my own heart." She turned to Caleb, her chest heaving, the raw emotion radiance making the air around her shimmer. "I don't want to be safe. Caleb, I want to be a person. I want to choose who I love, even if it burns the whole galaxy down." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the dust of dead stars. They were standing in the center of the vault. The gravity here was neutral. They floated slightly, their boots barely touching the floor. The dust motes drifted around them like a miniature nebula. Caleb looked at her, this fierce, broken, magnificent woman who was fighting a war against her own blood for the right to feel. "It scares you, doesn't it?" Caleb asked softly. Nixara looked at him, her defenses shattered. "Terrified," she admitted. "Because my mother is right. Love creates leverage. If I choose you, I am giving the world a way to hurt me. I am putting a knife in my own ribs and handing the handle to fate." She floated closer to him, drifting until they were inches apart. Caleb looked into her violet eyes. He saw the fear, but he also saw the defiance. "I won't own you, Nixara," he said. His voice was low, a vow spoken into the vacuum. "I am not here to be your weakness. I am not here to be a hostage." He reached out, his hands cupping her face. Her skin was warm, electric. "I won't fix you," he said. "I won't save you, and you don't need saving. I will stand beside you. I will watch your back. And if they try to use me against you, I will make them regret it. Nixara searched his face, looking for any sign of hesitation. She found none. You are a fool, little bear, she whispered, her voice trembling. I am an optimist, he corrected. She surged forward. The kiss was not graceful. It was a collision. It was the breaking of a dam that had held back 7 years of silence and erased memories. Nixara kissed him with a desperation that tasted of salt and ozone. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as they drifted in the zero gravity, their bodies turning slowly in the air. Caleb wrapped his arms around her waist, anchoring her. He kissed her back with everything he had, the fear, the awe, the desire that had been building since the moment she ran across the throne room. It was a kiss that felt like a conversation, a frantic exchange of promises and apologies. Then, slowly, Nixara pulled back. She didn't go far. Her forehead rested against his. Her breath mingled with his. Her hands rested on his chest, right over his heart. She waited. She didn't take more. She waited for him to close the distance again, or to step away. She was giving him the choice she had never been given. Caleb looked at her. He saw the question in her eyes. Is this real? Is this ours? He leaned in and kissed her again, softly this time, deliberate, a confirmation. Yours, he whispered against her lips. Mine, ours. Nixara let out a long, shuddering sigh, her body finally relaxing in his arms. Congratulations. A dry, synthetic voice crackled in their earpieces. You have achieved 97% of a doomed romance arc. Please proceed to the betrayal segment. Nixara groaned, dropping her head onto Caleb's shoulder. Hush. You have impeccable timing. I am programmed for dramatic interruption. Hush replied over the comms. Also, while you were engaged in biological docking procedures, I decrypted the rest of the file on the console. You might want to look at the scheduling data. Nixara pulled away, floating back to the console. She wiped her swollen lips with the back of her hand and focused on the screen. Her eyes narrowed. Vespera isn't waiting, she said. What do you mean? Caleb asked, drifting to her side. The logs show a remote activation sequence, Nixara said. Vespera has already primed the fabrication matrix. She is going to print the crown remotely, and she has moved the timetable up. She pointed to the date. The succession convergence isn't next week, she said. It's tonight. Tonight? Caleb asked. The Queen called an emergency session of the High Council to address the security breach, Nixara explained, her mind shifting back into tactical gear. Vespera manipulated her. She forced the Queen to gather everyone in one room, the throne hall. Nixara looked at Caleb. If Vespera activates the crown tonight, she freezes the entire government in one stroke. My mother, the generals, the ministers, they will be statues. And Vespera walks in and takes the regency. Caleb finished. Nixara turned away from the console. She looked at the exit. We can't destroy the machine, she said. If we destroy it, Vespera will just find another way. We have to go back. To the palace? Caleb asked. You are a fugitive. The Queen has a kill order on me. Nixara turned back to him. She looked different. The volatility was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I am not going back to beg, she said. I am not going back to ask my mother for forgiveness. She walked over to the weapons locker they had scavenged earlier and checked the charge on her blaster. I am going back to take the stage, she said. Vespera wants a show? I will give her a show. I will walk into that throne hall and I will tell the truth about the lattice, about the crown, about us. She looked at Caleb. I am going to control the narrative, she said. But I can't do it alone. Caleb picked up his own weapon. He checked the power cell. He looked at Nixara, the woman who had just cut a tracker out of her own arm and kissed him in the ruins of a dead civilization. "Lead the way, Your Highness," he said. Nixara smiled. It was a dangerous smile. "Call me Nixara," she said. She hit the comms. "Hush! Get the engines hot. We are coming up." "And hush? Yes. Your bad decision? Prepare the external speakers," Nixara commanded. "I want the whole damn empire to hear us coming." The Eidolon did not look like a royal vessel. It looked like a piece of burning orbital debris, which was exactly the point. The ship rattled violently as it skimmed the upper atmosphere of Astraeum Prime, the friction shielding glowing a dull, angry orange. Inside the cockpit, the lighting was red and urgent. Nixara sat at the helm, her hands moving with a fluid precision that belied the terror of the maneuver she was attempting. Caleb sat beside her, gripping the crash restraints, watching the holographic readout of the palace's energy grid. "We have a window of 4 seconds, Hush announced, his voice dry and devoid of comfort. "The ceremonial power rerouting occurs at exactly midnight. The southern thermal exhaust port will dilate to vent excess heat from the core. If we are early, we crash into a shield wall. If we are late, we are incinerated by plasma venting at 5,000 degrees. No pressure," Caleb muttered. "I am timing it to the heartbeat of the machine," Nixara said. Her eyes narrowed. "The palace breathes. Caleb, just like a living thing. Below them, the Astraeum Palace sprawled like a glittering mountain of glass and light. It was beautiful and impenetrable. But Nixara knew its anatomy. She knew that every night, before the succession convergence rituals, the grid flushed its capacitors. "Now!" Nixara shouted. She cut the engines. The Eidolon dropped like a stone. The sudden silence was deafening. They fell toward the southern spire, aiming for a narrow, glowing slit in the crystal armor. 3, 2, 1. Nixara slammed the thrusters back on full burn. The ship jerked, decelerating violently, and shot through the opening just as the iris began to widen. They cleared the vent by inches, the heat sensors screaming a warning, and skidded into the vast echoing darkness of the subterranean cargo intake. "We are in," Caleb breathed. "Technically, we are in the garbage disposal," Hush corrected. "But yes, we are inside." They moved through the service tunnels, abandoning the ship. Nixara knew the route to the royal apartments, not the grand hallways used by diplomats, but the narrow, hidden passages used by servants and spies. She moved with a lethal determination, the blaster strapped to her hip looking stark against her gray maintenance jumpsuit. They reached a panel of false stone. Nixara pressed her palm against it, not for a scan, but to trigger a mechanical latch hidden in the texture of the rock. The panel slid open. They stepped into the Queen's private sanctum. It was not the cold, intimidating throne hall. This room was quiet, dimly lit by floating orbs of soft amber light. The walls were lined with books, actual paper books, rare and ancient. In the center of the room, sitting in a high-backed chair by a holographic fireplace, was Queen Elira. She did not look like the terrifying matriarch of stars. She looked like a tired woman holding a glass of wine. She didn't turn around. "I wondered when you would come back," the Queen said. Her voice was low, heavy with exhaustion. Nixara stepped into the light. "Hello, Mother." The Queen stood up slowly. She turned to face them. When she saw Caleb, her eyes tightened, but she did not call the guards. She looked at the scar on Nixara's arm, the raw red burn where the tracker had been. "You cut it out," the Queen whispered. "I cut you out," Nixara said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Queen Elira set her glass down. Her hands were shaking. I had to know where you were. I had to know you were safe. Safe? Nixara stepped closer, the air around her crackling with bioelectric tension. You put a kill order on the man I love. You erased my memories. You turned my life into a lie. You call that safety? I call it survival, the Queen snapped, her composure cracking. She took a step forward, her expression pleading. Do you think I wanted to hurt you? 7 years ago, when the coup failed, the Lattice was already watching. They knew about the bond, Nixara. They knew that if you fell in love with a human, your biology would make you vulnerable. They would have used him to break you. They would have tortured him until you signed over the Empire just to make it stop. So you erased him, Nixara said. I removed the leverage, the Queen cried. I used the cryostem protocol to bury the bond so deep that even you couldn't find it. I did it to make you strong, to make you untouchable. Nixara stared at her mother. The tragedy of it hung in the air, a monstrous act born of desperate love. You didn't make me strong, Nixara said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than shouting. You made me hollow. You protected the weapon, but you broke the daughter. She gestured to Caleb. Protection without trust is just another form of imprisonment. Mother, you tried so hard to keep me from being hurt that you became the one hurting me. The Queen looked at Caleb. She looked at the way he stood beside Nixara, not behind her like a servant, but beside her like an anchor. She saw the way Nixara leaned slightly toward him, a subconscious gravitation. I was trying to save you, the Queen whispered, tears spilling over her pale cheeks. Then let me save myself, Nixara said. Call off the guards, cancel the order, help us stop Vespera. The Queen opened her mouth to answer. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a harsh, flashing crimson light. A siren began to wail, not the alarm of an intruder, but the deep, resonant tone of a royal decree. The holographic wall screen flickered to life. It was Lady Vespera Kane. She was standing in the media center, looking grave and concerned. Her image was being broadcast to every screen in the palace, every datapad in the city, every ship in orbit, citizens of the Astrium. Vespera's voice was smooth, laced with false sorrow. It is with a heavy heart that I must reveal a terrible danger within our walls. Princess Nixara has returned, but she is not herself. A video feed appeared on the screen beside Vespera. It was doctored footage. It showed Caleb, grainy and shadowed, injecting something into Nixara's neck. It showed Nixara eyes glowing wild and unstable, smashing a piece of equipment. The human Caleb Rains has infected the princess with a xenobiological pathogen. Vespera lied, her eyes wide with concern. It creates a chemical dependency, a false bond. He is using her biology to infiltrate the throne. She is compromised. She is dangerous. Nixara stared at the screen, her mouth open in shock. For the safety of the Empire, Vespera continued, and for the safety of the princess herself, I am declaring a medical martial law. The princess is to be detained for treatment. The human is to be terminated on sight as a biological terrorist. The transmission ended. The Queen stared at the blank screen. She turned to Nixara, her face pale. She moved the timeline up, the Queen whispered. The doors to the sanctum shook. Someone was pounding on the other side. Open up! It was the voice of the royal guard. By order of the regent. She has already declared herself regent, Caleb said, drawing his weapon. Queen Elira looked at her daughter. There was a moment of decision. She moved to her desk and pressed a hidden switch. A section of the bookcase swung open, revealing a dark corridor. Go, the Queen said. Mother, come with us. Nixara said. I cannot, the Queen said. I am the only thing standing between Vespera and total legitimacy. If I run, she wins. I will hold them here. She looked at Caleb. Keep her alive, human, the Queen commanded. That is your only job. I intend to, Your Majesty, Caleb said. Nixara hesitated, looking at her mother one last time. Go, the Queen shouted. Nixara grabbed Caleb's hand, and they ran into the darkness. Behind them, the sanctum doors burst open, and the sound of shouting filled the room. The palace had turned against them. As they emerged from the secret passage into the grand gallery, the building itself seemed to be hunting them. The walls, usually soothing translucent crystal, were pulsing with angry red light. Blast doors were sealing shut ahead of them. Hovering maintenance drones, reprogrammed by Vespera's override, buzzed aggressively, their welding torches lit. We need to get to the throne hall, Nixara shouted, shooting a drone out of the air. Vespera is going to bring the crown there for the convergence. They sprinted down the gallery. Ahead, a squad of guards turned the corner. There, one of them shouted. The terrorist! They raised their rifles. Suddenly, a side door slid open. A hand reached out and yanked Caleb and Nixara inside. They stumbled into a linen closet. Quiet, a voice hissed. It was a young woman with nervous eyes, wearing the robes of a palace archivist. I'm Alara, she whispered. I falsify the records Vespera tells me to. I hate her. Why are you helping us? Caleb asked, breathless. Because the princess once remembered my name, Alara said, looking at Nixara. 3 years ago, you asked me about my sick father. No noble ever does that. She pressed a data chip into Nixara's hand. Access codes for the service elevators, Alara said. They are locked down, but this will override it. Go to the kitchen level. You have friends there. Thank you, Nixara said, gripping the woman's shoulder. They slipped back out, using the codes to bypass the sealed doors. They reached the kitchen level, a chaotic labyrinth of steam and noise. The staff froze when they saw the princess. Then, a massive chef with 4 arms stepped forward. It was Sarah's contact. The smuggler sends her regards. The chef grunted. He pointed to a large waste chute. Slide down to the armory sub-level. He said, Captain Valda is waiting. She has been expecting a riot. They slid. It was undignified, smelling of exotic vegetable peels, but it was fast. They landed in a pile of laundry in the armory. Captain Valda was there. She was a towering woman in golden armor, polishing a heavy plasma cannon. She looked up as they tumbled out of the chute. About time, Valda said. Vespera just tried to arrest my lieutenant. I punched her envoy in the throat. I assume we are doing a coup? We are stopping one, Nixara said, climbing out of the laundry. Good enough, Valda said. She racked the slide of her cannon. They moved as a unit now, Nixara, Caleb, and Valda. They fought their way up toward the throne hall. The corridors were a war zone. Loyalists were fighting Vespera's private mercenaries. Laser fire scorched the crystal walls. In the Hall of Ancestors, they ran into a standoff. 6 mercenaries were pinned down by a group of rebellious courtiers armed with decorative swords. Mirth, the protocol droid, was floating in the middle of the crossfire. Excuse me, Mirth chirped, his voice amplified. According to the Palace Handbook, Section 4, Paragraph 9, discharging energy weapons near the tapestry of the first light is strictly prohibited. It voids the insurance policy. Please aim lower. A laser bolt pinged off Mirth's casing. Oh, honestly, the droid sighed. I am going to have to file a complaint. Nixara didn't slow down. She raised her hand, and a bolt of blue bioelectricity arced from her fingertips, overloading the mercenaries' weapons. They dropped the guns, yelping as the metal grew hot. "Move!" Nixara commanded. They were close. The great doors of the throne hall were just ahead, but Vespera was waiting. As they entered the antechamber of echoes, a room of mirrors and shifting floor plates, the gravity suddenly flipped. Caleb shouted as the floor became the ceiling. He fell upward, slamming into a chandelier. Nixara, with her flight training, managed to grab a pillar. Caleb! Before she could reach him, a containment field snapped into existence around Caleb. It was a hexagon of hard light, trapping him in a suspended cage. Lady Vespera stepped out from behind a mirror. She was surrounded by elite lattice agents. "Such a touching struggle," Vespera said, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics. She waved a hand, and Caleb's cage floated toward her. "Let him go!" Nixara screamed, pulling her blaster. "Drop the weapon, princess," Vespera said calmly, "or I will compress the field until your pet human fits in a teacup." Nixara froze. She looked at Caleb, trapped in the glowing box, struggling against the pressure. She slowly lowered her gun. Vespera smiled. She walked up to the cage, looking at Caleb with disdain. "You see, Nixara," she said, turning back to the princess, "this is why you are weak. You care about this thing, this short-lived, fragile biological accident." She tapped the cage. "I am not stealing the throne, my dear," Vespera mocked. "I am saving it from your incompetence. I am going to turn you into a monster on live television. You will attack me to save him, and the court will see a feral beast that needs to be put down. And then they will beg me to turn on the crown." She looked at Caleb. "Any last words? Mr. Rains? Perhaps a plea for mercy?" Caleb stopped struggling. He pressed his face against the hard light barrier. He looked at Vespera, his expression changing from fear to a look of utter confusion. "Wait," Caleb said loudly. "Is this the part where you explain the evil plan? Because I have to say, the monologue is a little derivative. I am saving you from yourself. It's very cliché villain. Do you have anything fresher? Maybe a PowerPoint presentation?" Vespera blinked. Her smile faltered. "Excuse me? I mean, look at the outfit," Caleb continued, gesturing vaguely at her crimson robes. "The horns, the red dress, the spooky lighting. You are really leaning into the evil sorceress aesthetic. It's a bit camp, isn't it? I expected something more nuanced from a master strategist." Vespera's eyes narrowed. "You are insolent, and you are holding the key to a mind control device upside down." Caleb lied. Vespera instinctively looked down at her hand. She wasn't holding the key yet, but the distraction worked. Her focus broke for a microsecond. The containment field wavered. Nixara didn't miss the beat. She didn't shoot Vespera. She shot the chandelier Caleb had hit earlier. The massive crystal fixture detached from the ceiling, which was currently the floor, and fell toward the lattice agents. Gravity reversed again. The room spun. The chandelier crashed into the agents. The containment field shattered as Vespera lost concentration. Caleb dropped to the floor, rolling to his feet. Nixara lunged. She hit Vespera with the force of a freight train. They crashed into a wall of mirrors, shattering them into a million glittering shards. Nixara was on top of her, hands glowing with raw power. She pinned Vespera to the ground. "You wanted a monster?" Nixara snarled, her voice distorted by the energy pouring off her. She raised her fist. The air around her turned violet. Arcs of lightning lashed out, scorching the floor. She was going to kill her. She was going to burn Vespera's face off right there in the antechamber. "Nixara!" The voice cut through the roar of the energy. Caleb was there. He wasn't looking at Vespera. He was looking at Nixara. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. the wrist that was glowing with lethal power. "Nixara, stop!" Caleb shouted. She looked at him, her eyes wild, the pupils swallowed by light. "He deserves to die." "Maybe," Caleb said, holding her gaze, "but not like this. Not by losing yourself." He squeezed her wrist. The bioelectricity stung him, burning his palm, but he didn't let go. "You are not the monster she wants you to be," Caleb said firmly. "You are the queen. Act like one." Nixara trembled. She looked down at Vespera, who was staring up with genuine terror for the first time. Nixara took a deep, ragged breath. The violet light faded. The hum of energy died down. She didn't strike. She leaned down, her face inches from Vespera's. "I am not your victim," Nixara whispered, "and I am not your excuse." She stood up, yanking Vespera up by her collar and shoving her into the arms of Captain Valda, who had just cleared the last of the mercenaries. "Arrest her," Nixara commanded. Valda grinned. "With pleasure." Vespera laughed. It was a cold, jagged sound. "You think this is over?" she spat, blood trickling from her lip. "You are too late, little princess. The convergence has begun. The device is already inside." She looked toward the massive doors of the throne hall. "My agents have the key," Vespera hissed, "and they have orders to activate it the moment the doors open." Nixara looked at the doors. She could hear the chanting from inside. The succession convergence. The entire High Council, the generals, the ministers, they were all in there. "If that crown activates," Caleb said, looking at the time, "everyone inside gets frozen." "We have to get in there," Nixara said. She looked at Caleb. "Are you ready to make an entrance?" Caleb checked his blaster. He straightened his torn maintenance jumpsuit. "After you, Your Highness." Nixara placed her hands on the massive doors. She pushed. The doors groaned open. The scene inside was a tableau of imminent disaster. The throne hall was packed with hundreds of nobles. In the center, beneath the floating diamond throne, stood a pedestal. On the pedestal sat the cryostom crown, a terrifying halo of silver needles and pulsing blue light. Standing next to it was General Thorne, holding a small crystalline prism, the activation key. He saw the doors open. He saw Nixara. He saw Vespera in chains. He didn't hesitate. He raised the key toward the crown. "Stop him!" Nixara screamed, sprinting forward. But the distance was too great. General Thorne smiled. He slotted the key into the crown. The device hummed. A wave of freezing cold air blasted outward from the pedestal, knocking the front row of nobles to their knees. The light from the crown expanded, a dome of blue stasis energy rapidly growing, consuming the dais, consuming the throne, moving outward to swallow the entire hall. Nixara skidded to a halt, Caleb beside her. The wave was coming. "It's active!" Caleb shouted. Nixara looked at the wave of blue silence rushing toward them. She looked at the nobles freezing mid-scream, their bodies locking into statues. "We can't stop it," Nixara whispered. Caleb grabbed her hand. "We don't stop it," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "We override it." "How?" "You have the royal blood," Caleb said, pointing to the crown. "And I have the resistant neural pattern. We are the key, Nixara." The wave hit them. Part 5 ended in a flash of blinding blue cold, leaving them standing on the edge of a frozen world. The fate of the Empire resting on whether 2 heartbeats could beat louder than a machine designed to silence them forever. The wave of blue light that swept through the throne hall did not feel like cold. It felt like silence given physical weight. It crashed over the dais, rolled down the steps, and washed over the hundreds of assembled nobles, guards, and drones. It was the cryostom effect. Time didn't stop, but the biology perceiving it did. Caleb gasped. the air in his lungs suddenly feeling as thick as syrup. He fell to one knee, his limbs heavy, his neurons firing with a sluggish, terrifying delay. Beside him, Nixara stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the dais. Her violet eyes were wide, her pupils dilating as she fought the paralysis trying to rewrite her nervous system. "Look at them," Lady Vespera's voice rang out. It was the only sound in the room that wasn't distorted. She stood near the pedestal, shielded by a portable dampening field, her crimson robes untouched by the blue haze. Caleb forced his head up. The throne hall had become a museum of living statues. A duke in the front row was frozen mid-shout, his mouth open, his hand raised in protest. A drone hovered motionless in the air, its rotors spinning slowly, barely keeping it aloft in the thickened atmosphere. Queen Elira sat on her diamond throne, her face a mask of serene, frozen shock, her hands gripping the armrests. It was a tableau of trapped breath. Vespera stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the obsidian floor. She gestured to the frozen queen. "Behold the fragility of the old order," Vespera announced, her voice amplified to the entire empire. "A queen who freezes in the face of danger, a princess who runs off with alien strays, and a court that cannot decide between survival and sentiment." She turned to the cameras, which were still streaming, likely broadcasting this nightmare to every screen on the planet. "Citizens of the Astreum," Vespera declared, smiling with the benevolence of a viper, "do not fear this silence. It is safety. I have activated the emergency preservation protocol. I have paused the chaos." She walked toward Caleb and Nixara, who were struggling to stand in the center of the blue field. "The crown is not fully active yet," Vespera said softly, stopping a few feet away. "It is currently operating at 30% capacity. Just enough to sedate, just enough to listen." She looked down at Caleb, but to make it permanent, to expand this peace to the entire city. "I need a stabilizer." Caleb gritted his teeth, forcing his brain to work through the sludge. "You need a filter," he wheezed. Vespera raised an eyebrow. "The crown. It's too strong," Caleb rasped, his human mind fighting the alien tech with stubborn resilience. "It creates a feedback loop. If you turn it to 100% without a buffer, it doesn't just freeze minds, it wipes them. You will lobotomize the entire population." Vespera clapped her hands slowly. "Clever pet," she said. "You are correct. The ancient designers were crude. They lacked nuance. The device requires a neural interface that can process chaos and translate it into order." She leaned in, her eyes glinting. "And that is why you are here. Mr. Rains, your human brain. It is messy, redundant, resistant to the standard imperial neural pathways. You are the perfect grounding rod." She pulled a silver device from her belt, a secondary interface collar. "Submit," Vespera commanded. "Put this on. Interface with the crown. Stabilize the field for me, and I will let the princess live. I will keep her as a figurehead, frozen, perhaps, but alive." "And if I refuse?" Caleb asked, sweat dripping down his face. "Then I will increase the output to maximum anyway," Vespera said, shrugging. "It will turn the brains of everyone in this room to soup, including your beloved princess. I will rule over a kingdom of drooling husks. It is less elegant, but effective." Nixara let out a growl, a low, vibrating sound in her chest. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking violently against the pressure of the field. "Don't touch him," she snarled. Vespera laughed. "Look at her, a feral animal protecting its meal. This is why you are unfit. Nixara, you are contaminated by human emotion." Suddenly, a voice cut through the heavy air. "She is not contaminated, Lady Vespera." She has evolved. The voice came from the throne. Vespera spun around. Caleb and Nixara looked up, stunned. Queen Elira was standing. The frozen mask was gone. The queen stood tall, her silver hair shimmering in the blue light. She stepped down from the dais, moving through the cryostom field with an effort that was visible but manageable. She was not frozen. Impossible, Vespera hissed, taking a step back. The crown affects all royal biology. You should be a statue. I am the matriarch of stars, Elira said, her voice cold and hard. Do you think I would sit on a throne I did not understand? I have spent the last 7 years building up a micro-tolerance to this frequency. She stopped between Vespera and Nixara. I knew you would use it, Vespera. I knew you were the head of the lattice, but I needed proof. I needed you to commit treason in front of the entire empire. Nixara stared at her mother. The realization hit her, and it hurt more than the freezing cold. The termination order, Nixara whispered. The trap in the security hub. Elira didn't look at Vespera. She looked at her daughter. I planted the order, the queen admitted. I authorized the ambush. I knew you would run. I knew you would go to the mirror market. I needed you to flush them out. I needed Vespera to believe I was turning on you, so she would feel safe enough to strike. Nixara recoiled as if she had been slapped. I was bait? She asked, her voice breaking. You risked Caleb's life. You risked my life, just to stage a political play. I risked everything to save the throne, the queen shouted, her composure cracking for a second. The lattice was a cancer. Nixara. They were eating us from the inside. I had to draw them into the light. She reached out toward her daughter. It worked. Nixara. We have her. The cameras are rolling. She has confessed. We can end this now. Nixara looked at her mother's outstretched hand. Then she looked at Caleb, who was struggling to breathe under the weight of the field Vespera was still controlling. You still don't get it, Nixara said, stepping back from the queen. You manipulated me. You used the man I love as a pawn. You are just like her. She pointed at Vespera. You both think people are just pieces on a board. Vespera seized the moment of division. Enough melodrama, she screamed. She slammed her hand onto the control pedestal. General Thorne, maximize the output. Override the safeties. General Thorne, who had been standing by the crown, twisted the crystalline key. The blue light intensified to a blinding white. The hum became a scream. The temperature plummeted. Caleb felt his knees hit the floor. His vision tunneled. The pressure on his brain was immense, like a physical hand squeezing his frontal lobe. I need the stabilizer, Vespera yelled, grabbing Caleb by the hair and dragging him toward the crown. Nixara moved to stop her, but the queen grabbed Nixara's arm. No, the queen shouted. If you step into the inner circle without shielding, it will kill you. Nixara ripped her arm free. Vespera held the silver collar to Caleb's throat. Connect to the crown, human, she shrieked. Do it, or I will shatter her mind right now. Caleb looked up. He saw Nixara standing 10 feet away. He saw the queen watching, calculating. He saw the nobles, frozen in their terror. He looked at Nixara. She wasn't looking at the queen. She was looking at him. And in her eyes, he didn't see a command. He didn't see a princess looking at a subject. He saw a woman looking at her partner. She took a step toward him, entering the high-intensity zone of the field. Her skin began to frost over. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Caleb, she said, her voice shaking but clear. She stopped inches from him and Vespera. She didn't attack Vespera. She placed her hands on Caleb's chest. You don't have to do this, she said. What? Caleb wheezed. You don't have to save me, Nixara said, tears freezing on her cheeks. You don't have to be the hero. You don't have to be the martyr. You can walk away. She looked at Vespera. Let him go, and I will surrender. Nyxara said, I will take the crown. I will be your statue. Just let him leave. No, Caleb whispered. Nyxara looked down at him, her gaze fierce and loving. I will not claim you like property. Caleb, I will not be my mother. I will not use you. You are free. Run. It was the bravest thing he had ever seen. She was offering herself up to an eternity of frozen silence just to give him a chance to survive. She was breaking the cycle of control that had defined her entire life. Caleb looked at the open door of the throne hall. He could run. He could make it to the ship. He could disappear into the stars. He looked back at Nyxara. He reached up and covered her hands with his own. I'm not a prop, he said, his voice gaining strength. And I'm not a victim. He stood up, forcing Vespera to step back. He didn't pull away from Nyxara. He stepped closer to her. I choose this, Caleb said. I choose you. He turned to Vespera. You want a stabilizer? He asked. You want a neural interface that can handle the chaos? He grabbed Nyxara's hand. Then you get both of us. Nyxara understood instantly. She didn't argue. She squeezed his hand. Together, she whispered. Caleb nodded. Now! They didn't put on Vespera's collar. They lunged for the crown itself. Nyxara grabbed the left side of the crystalline structure, her royal blood interacting with the biometric sensors. Caleb grabbed the right side, his human palms pressing against the vibrating needles. The effect was instantaneous. A shockwave of pure energy blasted through them. Caleb screamed as his mind was pulled into the machine. He felt the cold, hard logic of the cryostem system trying to freeze him, trying to lock his thoughts into a grid. But his mind was human. It was messy. It was full of contradictions, memories of jazz music, the smell of old books, bad jokes, and the warmth of the sun. It was chaos, and Nyxara was the conduit. Push it back, Caleb shouted in the psychic void. Use the authorization. Nyxara, connected to him through the bond in the machine, took his chaotic neural pattern and weaponized it. She used her royal access to rewrite the targeting parameters. Targeting, all loyal subjects. Delete, new target, lattice frequency, command implants, treason markers. Vespera realized too late what was happening. No, she screamed, reaching for the key. Nyxara opened her eyes. They were glowing with a blinding violet light. Freeze, she commanded. The crown pulsed, not with blue, but with gold. The wave snapped back. It rushed outward from the dais, passing harmlessly through the queen, passing through the guards, passing through the nobles. It hit Lady Vespera. She stopped mid-scream. Her body went rigid. The crimson robe settled around her as she locked into place. A look of absolute terror frozen on her face. It hit General Thorne. He froze with his hand on his weapon. It hit the lattice agents in the crowd, one by one. They stiffened and stopped, trapped in their own bodies. Then, the wave dissipated. The silence broke. The throne hall erupted into chaos. Nobles gasped, collapsing to the floor as their muscles unlocked. Guards stumbled, blinking rapidly. The drones whirred back to full speed. Caleb and Nyxara fell away from the crown, collapsing onto the steps of the dais. Caleb lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling, gasping for air. His brain felt like it had been put in a blender, but he was alive. He was thinking. Nyxara crawled over to him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright. "Did we do it?" she whispered. Caleb looked over at Vespera. She was a statue trapped in a prison of her own making. "I think she's giving you the silent treatment." Caleb groaned. Nyxara let out a laugh, a breathless, hysterical, wonderful sound. She collapsed onto his chest, burying her face in his neck. "We did it," she sobbed. The aftermath was not quiet. Vespera was not dead, but she was trapped in a stasis lock that would take weeks to reverse. Palace guards, led by Captain Valda, were moving through the hall, arresting the frozen conspirators. The evidence Nixara and Caleb had broadcast, the confession, the manipulation, was playing on every screen. But Vespera had one last knife to twist. As the medics were loading her frozen form onto a grav stretcher, the automated contingency on her datapad triggered a final message, projected into the center of the hall. "If you are seeing this, I have failed," Vespera's recorded voice sneered. "But do not celebrate. The blueprint for the Cryostom crown was not just in the vault. I sold it. The frontier warlords have the data. You have stopped me, but you have started an arms race. The galaxy will freeze. Princess, it is only a matter of time." The message faded. A heavy silence fell over the room. The nobles looked at each other, fear creeping back into their eyes. The Empire was safe for today, but the weapon was out there. Queen Elira walked down the steps. She looked old. The invincible aura of the matriarch was gone, replaced by the weary reality of a mother who had almost destroyed her family to save it. She stopped in front of Nixara. "You were right," the queen said softly. Nixara stood up, helping Caleb to his feet. She didn't bow. "About what?" Nixara asked. "About the cage," the queen said. "I tried to control everything, the timeline, the threats, you. And all I did was create a vulnerability for Vespera to exploit." She took the heavy jeweled crown from her own head. It was the ceremonial crown of the Empire, not the weapon. The Empire needs a leader who understands the future, not one who is terrified of it, the queen said. She held the crown out to Nixara. "Take it. I abdicate. The throne is yours." The court gasped. This was unprecedented, an immediate transfer of power. Nixara looked at the crown. It was beautiful. It was heavy. It was everything she was raised to want. She looked at the nobles, waiting for her to accept. She looked at Caleb, who stood slightly behind her, offering no advice, just support. "No," Nixara said. The queen blinked. "No." Nixara pushed the crown back toward her mother. "I will not take the throne today," Nixara said, her voice ringing out clearly. "Not like this. Not as a reaction to a crisis. An easy crowning is just another form of hiding." She turned to face the court. "We have work to do. Vespera said the enemy is coming. She is right. If we want to survive, we cannot just change the person sitting in the chair. We have to change the chair." She ticked off points on her fingers. 1. A complete transparency law for the succession. No more shadow games. 2. The abolition of mind editing technology as a matter of state policy. No one erases a memory again, ever. She looked at Caleb. And 3. The end of the preservation laws regarding interspecies relationships. Love is not treason. It is not a weakness. It is the only thing that just saved your lives. She turned back to her mother. "I will take the throne when those laws are written and signed. Until then, you remain queen, and I will be your general. I will hunt down the warlords. I will secure the frontier, and I will earn that crown." Queen Elira stared at her daughter. For the first time in years, she didn't look worried. She looked proud. "As you wish, General," the queen said, a small smile touching her lips. Later, on the observation deck, the chaos of the day had settled into a simmering administrative hum. Caleb stood by the railing, looking out at the city. The lights of the capital were coming back on, a sea of amber and violet stretching to the horizon. A shadow fell over him. It was Valerius, the functionary from his first day. "Mr. Rains," Valerius said, bowing stiffly, "the Queen and the General have requested to know your intentions." "My intentions?" Caleb asked. "There is a position available," Valerius said, "Royal Consort. It comes with a very nice apartment, a wardrobe allowance, and a ceremonial mute button. You would be expected to cut ribbons and look decorative." Caleb laughed. He thought about the last few days, the chases, the fights, the freezing cold of the mind machine. "No, thank you." "Valerius," Caleb said, "I think I'm done being a prop." "Then what shall I tell them?" "Tell them I am negotiating a new contract," Caleb said. "Independent envoy. Cultural bridge between the Empire and Terra. I want a salary, my own ship, and the right to tell the Queen when she is being unreasonable." Valerius looked horrified. "That is highly irregular." "So is freezing the entire government," Caleb said. "We live in irregular times." Valerius sighed. "I will draft the paperwork." "Speaking of paperwork," a familiar synthetic voice chimed in. "Hush," the AI, flickered into existence on a nearby terminal. "Congratulations," Hush said. "You survived the betrayal segment. You survived the heroic sacrifice segment. You even survived the awkward family reunion segment. Please enjoy the paperwork segment. It is statistically the longest part of any revolution." "I missed you too." "Hush," Caleb said. Nixara walked onto the deck. She had changed out of her battle-torn jumpsuit into a simple robe of deep blue silk. She looked tired, but the tension that had carried her for 7 years was gone. She walked up to Caleb. Valerius and Hush discreetly faded into the background. "Envoy?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I need a day job," Caleb said. "I can't just be the guy who dates the boss." Nixara smiled. She moved closer to him, leaning against the railing. Her hand brushed his. She didn't grab him. She didn't cling. She just let her fingers rest against his, a point of contact that was entirely voluntary. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the rings of the planet rise over the horizon. The great bands of ice and dust caught the light of the twin suns, glowing with a fire that looked like hope. "We have a lot of problems," Caleb said. "The warlords, the lattice remnants, your mother trying to micromanage your reform bill." "I know," Nixara said. "It's going to be dangerous." "I know." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. "But we get to choose it," she whispered. Caleb looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen in the burning corridor 7 years ago, and in the throne room when she ran to him. But now, it wasn't a fire that threatened to consume her. It was a light to see by. "Yes," Caleb said, squeezing her hand. "We get to choose." He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was soft, lingering, and full of the one thing the Empire had tried to outlaw for 1,000 years. It was full of tomorrow, and for the first time in the history of the Astrium, the palace didn't freeze. It just kept spinning, warm and alive, carrying them into the future they were building together.